Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Let me start again. So I'm Daniela Chiaretti, a journalist from Valor Econômico from Brazil. And I welcome everybody to this panel with this incredible scientist that will tell us a lot about climate and the Amazon. And so in line with G-STIC team of accelerating breakthrough technological solutions for the SDGs with a focus on climate, SPA authors will discuss the importance of the Amazon to the region and to the world, the current context and landscape, and possible solutions to inform decision-making, including on bioeconomy and forest restoration. I invite everybody to listen to these authors and also make questions. I will do it whenever I have an opportunity. So without further delays, let's start with the welcome remarks of Mr. Carlos Nobre. Carlos Nobre is a super well-known scientist, and he is the SPA co-chair. He's also former National Secretary for Research and Development Policies at the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation of Brazil, and President of Brazil Agency for Postgraduate Education. He's a foreign member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and member of the Brazilian Academy of Science, the World Academy of Science, and the Royal Society. So it's a pleasure to hear you, Carlos. Welcome.
Daniela and colleagues, thanks a lot for this meeting, very important meeting to discuss, in fact, solution spaces for the Amazon. I will say a few words about the science panel for the Amazon. In fact, this is not the slide. Can you put the slide about the science panel? No, I'm sorry. Turn it down. I mean, yeah, no, sorry. I think you got the wrong set.
I apologize.
I had only 5 slides. Yeah, I had only 5 slides. But anyway, put just that one with the key messages of the panel, please. No, the key messages. No.
I apologize.
No. That one. Okay. Keep that one. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the panel. The panel was created by Sustainable Solutions Development Network, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and also Emma Torres, and then was created in September 2019 after that explosion of deforestation in the Amazon, wildfires. And we put together 240 scientists, 42% female scientists, 7% indigenous scientists, and we put together all these groups and produced in 2 years the most comprehensive rigorous scientific assessment about the Amazon, released during COP26 in Glasgow. And the goal was really to understand scientifically, to say how we understand the evolution of the Amazon rainforest, maximum biodiversity, carbon storage, ecosystem service, water recycling, everything wonderful. The Amazon evolved over tens of millions of years. And then what happened in the last 50 years with the land use change, the policies that destroy more than 2 million square kilometers of the Amazon, 50% clear cut, 50% degradation. And then the third component of the science panel for the Amazon was really, let's look at solution space. Let's look for a future, a sustainable future, a pathway for the Amazon, which would really kind of make us avoid, and you could see in the other slides, there was one on tipping points, and basically more than one chapter of the book, of the report, talking about, you can move from the left-hand corner here, the Amazon, mostly forest, and then you replace with 50 to 70% of open canopy degraded ecosystem, losing more than 200, up to 300 billion tons. Luciana Gatti will talk more about the carbon, what the Amazon is doing. So basically, can you go back to the other one, the key messages? So those were the 4 key messages that the panel conveyed during COP26. And now we continue to work with the panel with more. We released 3 policy briefs during COP27 in Egypt, and they are related to the tipping point, related to the importance of indigenous territories, but also a policy brief, an innovative policy brief on creating the largest forest restoration project in the world, in the Arcs of Restoration project. But I just want to finalize by conveying these 4 key messages. What will it take to save the Amazon? Really, the Amazon we want, that's what the panel is about. The Amazon we want, basically, immediately, moratorium on deforestation and forest degradation in all the southern Amazon, the areas near the tipping point. Then zero deforestation degradation by 2030. This is all 134 countries signed during COP26, the zero deforestation, but we are not seeing that as yet. 2022, there was a large increase in deforestation all over the tropics, including the Amazon. And then solution space, restore terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, as the Arcs of Restoration project, as I mentioned, we released during COP27. And then this, how to develop a vibrant new bioeconomy, healthy standing forests and flowing rivers bioeconomy. So this is the long-term challenge. And for this challenge, for finding solutions, we need innovative science, technology, and also the panel makes a very clear message. We have to value the indigenous peoples and local communities' knowledge that has been there for 12,000 years, indigenous people, always with the forest standing. The indigenous science has been very important to maintain the forest. So the science panel, for this new, vibrant, standing forest, flowing rivers bioeconomy, we have to combine our scientific knowledge with indigenous people, local communities' knowledge for technological innovations. So this is the challenge that all of us, the scientists, the Amazonian countries, the global societies have to save the Amazon. So I will stop here, and then you're going to see many presentations on what's going on in the Amazon and also solution space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. It was, well, the challenge is huge, as we all can see and hear, but we are coming back to Carlos at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. And just remind everybody, if you have any questions for our speakers, please send them on the Q&A button on Zoom, and I will try to make it. So now we are going to listen to Luciana Gatti, which is also a remarkable scientist, very famous for her recent findings. And she's an SPA lead author, researcher at the National Institute for Space Research, which is known by INPE in Portuguese. And she will talk about the Amazon River Basin, one of the most critical features of the Earth's hydroclimatic system. So Luciana, it's a pleasure to have you. Please.
It's a pleasure for me. Hi, everybody, and thank you for this so kind of words. Okay, let's talk about the Amazon carbon budget. First, I would like to comment his very famous article that showed 30 years Amazon emissions, but the mature forest was the ecosystem study. Then this is exactly what is happening with the forest. If we look at the first net biome change, we are observing a reduction in zinc during these 3 last decades. It's not the last because it finished in 2010, and then it's missing the last decade. But if you go for the last line in the left side, you see biomass mortality, where we observe the mortality increasing. What is happening in Amazon? Why the mortality is increasing? In the middle, you can see how is distributed these plots, studied sites. And in the right part, put more attention in the maps where you see the south of the basin is almost everything in red, showing reduction. Next, please. Here we can see better because this is a recalculation, the same database, but now distributing in 5 different regions to try and understand what's happening per region, because the Amazon is not a homogeneous ecosystem. We have many situations of different regions. And then we can see first in the south, east and the west, we are observing during these 3 decades that the zinc is reducing. Above 0 is emission, and then you see the tendency for the last decade that's missing in this study. Probably you'll be a source, and this is only primary forest. This is not the entire Amazon. This is plot is studying the primary forest where they measure the trunk 1.5 meters from the soil. And in the north part, we have a more uptake. Next. And when we look at this is the mean for the entire basin during these 3 decades. In the green line is the number the scientific community uses in the inventories, in the modelings about Amazon. They get the 3 decades mean. And if you look at the tendency, this is very distant with the reality. When we look at just these 3 decades, we observe a 40% decrease in zinc because we have increasing mortality. Next. Okay, now studying with vertical profiles. Studying with vertical profiles, we are looking the CO2 in the atmosphere. We are looking everything. This is the integration of all process, natural and anthropogenic process, the resultant of the human activities. And then you can see in the east part is the strongest carbon emissions, and in the west parts, the more neutral carbon emissions. This can mean that in the west part, the forests are more healthy, absorbing and almost compensating 100% of the anthropogenic emissions. But in the east part, this is not the scenario. And if you look at these numbers, it is around 10 times higher the east part than west part. And this is the results from our paper in 2021. Next. And when we look how much is deforested, you can go more to how is deforested. You will be observed the highest emission is from the region highest deforested, 37, 38 deforested southeast, and in the west part 16 and 17. Let's pay attention here. Lower than 20% is the number of our forest code. I would like to know the story. Who calculated this 20%? That is amazing. How is convenient, you know, for the forest, this limited. Okay, next. And then come the questions. Why the east region, the east part of Amazon is emitting almost 10 times more carbon than west? Let's understand how change the climatic conditions in the Amazon. I will not explain too much because Marengo will come explain better about this climate change, precipitation and temperature. But we observe a strong link between deforestation, losses in precipitation and increasing temperature. When we look in this influenced area for each of these 4 sites, we observe first in the east part, rain much less than in the west part. These dashed lines is when it's classified as a dry season. And then you see in Santarém is the lowest precipitation during August, September, and October, the peak of dry season, the time where is the burning season. In the Alf is the second lowest precipitation amount, and in the west side, almost is no dry season, have a much less dry season. The precipitation is higher, and we have less months with this stressful time. Next. And again, okay, next. Now we can observe the temperature. And here we observe the increase in temperature is much higher in the regions more deforested. And next. And then now you can see, no, one before. Here. Now you can see in the southeast part is the strongest deficit water vapor. We observe the temperature are increasing not in linear way, but in exponential way. If we look at how much increase in the last 4 decades and compare with the last 22 decades, we observe an increase in 50% increase in temperature. And of course, these conditions are bring a very strong stress because what's the dry season, each time is more drier, hotter, and longer. Of course, this impacts the forest. The forests are losing the uptake ability, the sink ability, and the mortality is increasing with this stress. Next. Okay, when we look here, the integration in the east part is region 1, and the integration in the west part is region 2. It is clear that in blue is the total emissions. The carbon emissions from this region 1, that is 27% the forest. When we compare with region 2, just 11% the forest is 80 times higher. And now we can observe many issues. First, the emissions is not only deforestation. There are more processes that come together with deforestation that produces more emissions that we can name indirect emissions, such as degradation. There are 4 types of degradation: the forest that was burned, the borders, and of course, with this very dry condition, the forest also is more flammable. Then we observe that in the region 1, net biome exchange, when we remove the fire emissions, some years produce sink, carbon sink, but another years carbon emissions. When we look at the region 2, less than 20% the forest, we observe around sink every year. And then it's clear that we are changing the forest. It's not only global change. What we are doing in Amazon, deforesting is producing a strong impact in how the forest is working. And then let's go to the another.
Dr. Luciana, just reminding you that you have 1 minute left. I'm sorry.
Yes. No, it's the last slide. Go, please. The last. Okay, here, because what's happening with the forest? Now it's a good news. We have a GCOS. COS is the same family of CO2 that we can look what's happening in photosynthesis. And when you look in these 4 sites that we are measuring in our vertical profiles, we can observe in the west parts, the sink are more stronger, and the GCOS measurements will help us to understand the impact in forest, how much is the sink, is the forest that is emitting more, or is the sink that is lower. Next. And here is the CO2 and COS. You can see in some part lower surface, you can see the CO2 increase. This can mean the CO2 coming more from anthropogenic emissions, and the COS continue to be a sink. Next. Okay, then concluding, Amazon could continue to be our climate change protection, absorbing carbon, producing precipitation producing precipitation and reduce temperature, because this is the way how the Amazon originally worked. But the forest in Amazon, we are making Amazon become an accelerator of climate change, because Amazon is becoming a carbon source, is reducing the precipitation and increasing temperature. Then it is really very urgent to zero deforestation, fire, and start many important projects to forest recover. That is our new arc of reforestation. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Luciana. It was quite frightening hearing you, but very interesting. We are going to come back, and thank you very much. We've learned a lot. So before I call Mrs. Paulette Binot, let me just a brief reminder. If you have any questions for our speakers, please send them on the Q&A button on Zoom. And now it's my pleasure to call Paulette Binot, and she's also an SPA author, senior lecturer, and the Deputy Dean of the School of Graduate Studies and Research at the University of Guyana. So we are going to have another perspective, and she's going to talk about the Amazon under threat, the impacts of deforestation and degradation. So this is the floor is yours, Mrs. Paulette. Where are you now?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. I just put on my video so that everyone can see that it's not an imposter, but because I'm using my phone, I take off my video. I am very pleased to be part of this panel, and so thank you very much, SBA, for inviting me to participate with such esteemed colleagues. So for the 10 minutes that I've been allotted, I want to just highlight some important facts about deforestation and degradation in the Amazon that we all inhabit. And then to talk about the drivers and the impacts of deforestation and degradation. And then what are the possible solutions? Next slide. The next slide, please. Yes. So let's just remind ourselves that when we talk about deforestation, we're referring to that complete removal of an area's forest cover. And we know that by 2018, the Amazon biome would have lost approximately 870,000 kilometers square of its original forest cover. Now, interestingly, 675 kilometers square would have been deforested in the Amazon by the same year, and that's equivalent to 14% of the Amazon's original forested area. Now, we have to note that most of the deforestation was concentrated in Brazil, that actually lost approximately 704 to 1,759 kilometers square of its forest. Next slide. So in relative terms, Brazil would have lost most of the forest within the context of the Amazon biome. We note, however, in contrast to that, that French Guyana, Suriname, and Venezuela have had the greatest proportion of their original forest cover. And as you can see on the slide, we're talking about 99.85, 97.92, and 97.89 respectively. So we know that in terms of the loss of forest cover, it's not homogeneous across the Amazon region. Next slide. The other important point that I think we need to take note of is that deforestation varies across space and time. So I have a few examples on the slide. As you can see, between 1991 and 2006, the annual deforestation would have been consistently above 20,000 kilometers square, peaking in 2003 when it surpassed 31,000. In 2007 until 2018, it was much lower. As you can see, we're talking about 9,918 kilometers square and 17,695 kilometers square. We note that in 1990, by 1990, only 5% of the forest would have been lost. And the figure reached 9% in 2000 and 12% in 2010. So that at some points we had lower rates of forest degradation, and in some years higher percentages. It suggests to us that when we had lower, there was something good, something we were doing that was right, something that helped us to sustainably use our forests as we pursue development. Now, next slide. Next slide, please. So we also talk about forest degradation. And when we talk about degradation in the forest, we're not talking about the loss of forest cover as such, because the loss of forest cover would negatively impact on the ecosystem services and functions of the forest. So we're talking about the degradation of the forest. And one of the drivers of degradation of the forest is the fire. Fire, and to a lesser extent, the drought. Thousands of hectares of forest are burnt across the basin every single year. And so these fires cause a number of impacts that we should take note of. For example, long-term ecological impacts. So you have high levels of stem mortality that would obviously affect negatively carbon stocks. You have significant taxonomic and functional changes in the plant community that would lead to a loss of high wood density and climax species and so on. You have a loss of many forest specialist birds and mammals, so a loss of biodiversity that would play a very important role in ecosystem functioning. And of course, we have to relate the impact also to human health, because the fires would emit a range of air pollutants that would degrade the air quality and impact on public health. Next slide.
Paulette, sorry to interrupt you. Just to remind you, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, so I'm almost finished. So what are the drivers and the impacts of of deforestation, because if we can understand the drivers and the impacts, I think it would help us to find solutions. So when we look at the direct drivers, colleagues, we're talking about infrastructure expansion, agricultural expansion, mining expansion. Now we understand that each of these sectors or each of these interventions for economic development is necessary, but it's the way that we pursue the expansion. So as a result of the way in which we pursue this expansion, we have a number of direct impacts. The slide shows you have issues related to biodiversity, for example, population declines in plant and animal species. You have population isolation, the issue of climate, as my colleague would have already spoken about. Then we have issues with landscape configuration, fragmentation and fragment isolation, issues with the hydrological cycles. And I just want to remind us that it is projected that by 2050, we are going to be dealing with the issue of water security. So interference with hydrological cycles, particularly watersheds that are located in forested areas, is something that we really have to be careful about. And of course, we have the emission of greenhouse gases that would not allow us to stay below the 2 degrees Celsius that we really need to in order to exist throughout the world, and we're leaving no country behind. Next slide, please. The next slide, please. Right. So we can just go to the last slide because of time. The possible solutions. The last slide, yes. So having pointed to the issues we're faced with in the context of deforestation and forest degradation, the time to act is now. It cannot be business as usual. So what can we do within the countries of the Amazonian region? We have to enforce existing laws, and we have to control land speculation in the region. We have to close down markets for illegal products. And it's not just closing down the markets, but we will have to be able to find alternative livelihoods that will be more sustainable for our people. We also have to implement an integrated monitoring system for deforestation and forest degradation across the basin with comparable, transparent, and accessible data sets. We have to develop large-scale emergency mechanisms to deal with the risk of fire. We have to have early warning systems that would prevent and to combat the forest fires, especially in years where we have the El Nino phenomenon. Last but not least, we have to restrict logging concessions to companies employing reduced impact logging techniques. So it's very important that we see how we can scale up these interventions to ensure that we protect the Amazon. If we protect the Amazon will protect us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paulette. It was the first time I've heard that we could have issues of water in the Amazon, which is really, really something amazing. And your point about closing down markets for illegal products like timber and gold, especially gold, is really being discussed these days. So thank you very much. And let's listen to another scientist, José Marengo, which is also an SPA lead author, member of the Brazilian Academy of Science and the World Academy of Science. And he's currently General Coordinator of Research and Development at the National Center for Monitoring and Early Warning on Natural Disasters, which we know by CEMADEM. So José Marengo will talk about the current and forecasted changes in the Amazon climate. So thank you very much, Marengo, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela. It's nice to see you again. Well, this is basically some of the results of the chapter 22 that was to do with climate from the SBA report in published in 21, and I have updated with some recent studies in the Amazon. So when we talk about the climate change in the Amazon, either anthropogenic or natural, according to observations, we see, for instance, that today the warming in the Amazon is 1.25 degrees. I mean, it's extremely important. Of course, we have some uncertainties because some of these data are based on reanalysis, which is a mix between model and observations. But I think to everyone who lives in there, you notice the warmer climate. And remember that the Amazon, it has to 90% of species, and also indigenous people that will be exposed to temperatures, higher temperatures. And it's not just temperature, it's the frequency of extreme weather events, like the weather and climate events, like the droughts and floods, which is affecting the functioning of the Amazon. And if we add to that the land use change, deforestation, that will reinforce actually the natural climate variability and produce climate change, and will increase the drought stress and fire risks and reduce the resilience of the forest and the population living in there. And at the end, as Carlos mentioned, all of these changes may reach a limit, a tipping point, a non-return point, when after that we may have another type of climate different from the one we have. You see, with the forest could be, for instance, no longer existing and could be replaced by either degraded forests or other type of vegetations that will change the climate as we know. And those are cascading effects that have enormous impacts on population, biodiversity, agricultural activities. It's not just inside the Amazon, but also outside the Amazon. And some of the studies we have seen, for instance, that the rainfall in some of the agribusiness part, the soy fields in there in West Central Brazil, part of that come from the Amazon. So wherever we have deforestation and land use changes will have impacts on the national economy. Next one, please. Something that Luciana has mentioned before. I mean, we have, for instance, in the dry season or wet season in general, we have a tendency of warming, and this warming is higher in the dry season. And as she mentioned, the dry season is getting longer. I mean, this is something we have noticed since the middle of the 70s. Actually, we thought that there was natural climate variability, what we call the decadal time scale changes. But there are some studies that shows that land use changes actually may also have impacts on the dry season. And having a dry season which is warmer, drier, and longer may have impacts on the onset of the rainy season. So this is not just the rainy season. If the dry season is getting longer, it also that the rainy season starts late. And this has been noticed particularly in the southern part of the Amazon and in the eastern part of the Amazon, and also outside the Amazon in the transition with Cerrado, where the Mato Piba region, where the soybean fields are there. Next one, please. Yeah, in terms of the hydrology impacts, I mean, since we have the data from the Rio Negro since 1903, we have been using that as a climate indicator. Of course, water levels of the Rio Negro at Manaus, they are integrator of rainfall in there. And you notice, for instance, the floods and droughts, the maximum levels, they show an increase, the minimum levels, they show a decrease. And you see the numbers in there. Those numbers represent extremes. And we have noticed, for instance, in the last 20 years, we have had 3 droughts and 3 floods that sometimes we refer them as once in a century. So we have 6 events, once in a century, in 20 years, meaning basically that the extremes are changing. And if you see in your right, you see the number of emergency days. Emergency days means when the Rio Negro water levels go above 29 meters, which is called the security level. And you have a concentration of 29 meters in 2009, in 2009, 2012, 2021, and also in 2022. Okay, so we have those extremes going in there, notice everywhere. Next one, please. And according to what climate change, I mean, in terms of scenarios, the Amazon is reaching a catastrophic situation. There are some values that we use perhaps as thresholds in terms of what we may refer as a tipping point. like the CO2 concentration larger than 500 parts per million, the warming, the deforested area about 25%, currently is 13.2, and the longer dry season. No? But it is not clear when we reach this point. Some people say that we have already reached reaching these points because some parts of the Amazon, as Luciana mentioned, have become and they changed to be a source and not a sink. But if we see the projections of climate change, the ones from the IPCC for a 4-degree warming, global warming, you see the first figure is the temperature, changes in temperature. The Amazon is basically above 5 degrees. And you see the next figure, the second one, is the changes in rainfall. The Eastern Amazon is the region where there will be a reduce in terms of rainfall, so warmer and drier. And then the others are extremes. Okay? But the most important are the two ones, and this is 44 degrees. If you see similar figures for 1.5, the changes are not so strong. That's the reason why the Paris Agreement should come in mind in terms of doing those changes, so the extremes will not be as high as the models produce. Then next one, please. This is from a paper which is still in review, no, with Bernardo Flores and co-authors. No? They identified 3 common ecosystem trajectories. The first one is, for instance, drought and fire and wildfires. The second one is drought, deforestation, and fires. And the third one is deforestation and fires. And we see all types of changes according to each one of these, let's say, trajectories. And at the end, we have what we could be possible, the resulting new state in terms of white sand savanna, open canopy degrade, and closed canopy degrade. The idea of this was basically to show what could happen when we mix human changes with natural changes. Okay, and this is just the option of what can say is a global change. Okay, so the idea of coming is a new climate in equilibrium. And the next one. This is the last one by David Lapole in a recent paper, and it's quite interesting because, for instance, the drivers of degradation. If you see among the drivers, you have at the end global climate change. You see, but we have also migration and population growth, cultural factors, lack of governance and corruption, a demand for timber and agricultural products, and in that we can add also mining, like the product we have now in Brazil. So all those changes, all of them work together in terms of the degradation process of the Amazon. Okay, so whatever happening there, either the temperatures increase, the hydrology changes, together with human-made activities, actually may produce a major change in the Amazon. You see, for instance, the edge effects, the fire effects, the timber extraction effects, or the drought effect. You see, it could be natural and a combination of natural plus human. So these underlying drivers stimulate disturbance situation like timber extractions and cause the forest degradation. And the forest degradation, they have immediate impact on the climate. And of course, there's satellite information that help us to see those informations almost in real time. And in terms of impacts, the impacts could be local, like, for instance, changes in biodiversity or affecting indigenous people, and also could be changes remotely, like warming, the global warming that produces the melting of the glaciers, and also the moisture transport from the Amazon region into the La Plata Basin, into the Pantanal region. So whatever happens in the Amazon may have impacts everywhere. I think this is, perhaps it's not new, but I like this paper because they put that with all the drivers, perhaps the natural, in quotes, global climate change, it could be magnified or amplified by human-made activities. So whatever we do, we have to consider that it's not just the reducing the emission of greenhouse gases, it's also the reduce into deforestation. To get in 2030 or 40, I think President Lula says, to get a zero deforestation, we hope it happens. We have heard that before, but we hope it happens, because if you see all those impacts that magnify or amplify the effects of climatic effects, hydrology effects, actually is a major degradation of the Amazon. And a major degradation of the Amazon means regional climate and global climate change. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Marengo. I was about to tell you that your time was almost over, but you were amazing.
I saw your face.
Thank you very much. And I want to ask you more about the new studies, but let's wait a little bit more for the last presentation, which is from Professor Carlos Young. And Carlos Young is also an SPA author and professor at the Institute of Economics, Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and member of the Brazilian Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is IPBES in Portuguese. And so we are going to listen now about these new perspectives for Amazonia, economic and political context at the regional and global scales. So, Professor Cadu, it's a pleasure to see you. And yes, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, Dan. It's always a pleasure to see you as well, and all our friends, and Carlos, Marengo, and everybody. I would just like to add to my CV, in this case, I think it's an important information. I'm also a collaborative professor at the Amazonian institutions, the postgraduate on environmental science at the State University of Mato Grosso, and more recently at the postgraduate course on the sustainability in the Amazon and environmental sciences at the Federal University of Amazonas. So I'm also someone that is in the very day of the Amazonian stuff. And I recall that many of these extreme events that was presented, I was there. So I saw the droughts, I saw the big floods, but also we are facing here at the Southeast. I'm currently in G-STIC. I'm watching it physically tomorrow, and I was yesterday in the bioeconomy sessions. Here in Rio de Janeiro, we are facing extremely different summer, very, very rainy with many disasters. And at the same time, at the very south of Brazil, we are facing a very strong drought in the west of Rio Grande do Sul, in the border with Argentina. So as Marengo said, it is affecting everybody. Next slide, please. But we need to move ahead. So what can we do? And besides of discussing each of these opportunities for something different, sustainable investment options for the Amazon that we can do different way, I just go for the most important part, which I think it's the message from our chapter, I believe it's chapter 30, on bioeconomy of standing forests and flowing rivers, is that we need principles. I'll return to this slide afterwards if I have time, because we have so little time to discuss every single of these many opportunities of doing something different. But let's go to the principles, and then we go to the examples. First of all, and I recall yesterday at G-STIC bioeconomy session, Carlos Nobre was present, gave an excellent speech. The importance of traditional knowledge. Whatever solution that we have for the Amazon, we have to incorporate something which is extremely important. And people are not aware that the Amazon has the highest linguistic diversity in the world. Everybody now is surprised with artificial intelligence open chat. Everybody now is going to the computer and asking computer, and this is a software for language. But to have a language, you need a structure. You, Danny, that belongs to this area. You know how important it is to structure a problem. And we have hundreds of languages, having 5 different, only in Brazil, main groups of linguistic orders, much more than Europe. And we are losing this. I would like to state that most of the trees and plant species that we have in the Amazon, their names are derived from indigenous knowledge. And many of them, they do not have a translation into either Portuguese or Spanish. And this is knowledge. Just to give an example, there is a very important tree. It is copaíba. Copaíba literally means the tree of oil, same as andiroba. So the name of it is already a tip for its importance. So this knowledge that has been accumulated has to be combined with science. And that was the fascinating talk that Carlos Nobre gave us yesterday on Amazonia 4.0, in the way that we can leapfrog and putting the traditional communities into the high science altogether. So combining them. Next one. Another important principle is that whatever we are talking about in terms of bioeconomy is much more important than economy itself. We're talking something that is more, as my friend and leading author Ricardo Romorai likes to say, it's an ethical proposition as well. And we have to recall the political economy as a science started from the philosophical area of ethics. So we need to set up an ethical normative value on the relationship, on how we, society, going to use nature, and to be aware of the consequences. And my previous colleagues presented how serious is the current situation. So a bioeconomy can guide social life towards regenerative use of the biotic material energy resources on which we all depend, including the weather in the rest of South America and the rest of the world. There are many immense opportunities for combating poverty and inequality and sustainable use of resources, including urban areas, but we need to do differently. Sustainability is not what you do, it's how you do it. And that's the main purpose of the proposition of the SPA on our chapter on the bioeconomy opportunities. Next slide, please. As everybody is aware, Amazon is now a global concern. It is very important that we think it internationally. And this is something, it's a warning for us, Brazilian, that we tend to think the Amazonian issues as a national issue. It is much more than that. But at the same time, we need all this global operation to work at the local scale level, at the community. That's the biggest challenge, to make it real, this principle that think global, act local. And so this is very important. Next slide, please. In order to have a new approach to whatever we are going to do with this. So in the past, we used to have these huge projects, development projects. I think the last bad example is the Belo Monte hydropower dam. How wrong it went. After all the bad examples of Balbina and problems from Tucuruí, we never learned that we need a new approach to development. In this sense, we need to integrate the needs of the local population, the needs of the Amazonian urban population, and of course, rural and traditional communities as the main target, within the main targets of the projects. We need high quality connection, agile transport services, robust information. We need better commercialization of the projects. We need science, but thinking from the local perspective, not from the traditional colonial way that we look into the Amazon. Next one. Very important to involve science, technology, institutions, mainly from the Amazon. We need to develop science to the Amazon, but we need to develop science from the Amazon. And we need to have to strengthen the research teaching capacities and in local institutions, of course, integrated with the rest of the world in order to use this mood of new possibilities for a new bioeconomy of standing forests and flowing rivers. Next, actually, I think it's the last. Return, please, to the previous one with the list of options. Then how much time do I have?
Like 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to use to give some examples. For example, logging. Logging in itself, it's not the problem. The problem is how we do it, how we commercialize it, how we extract it. There is a tremendous potential for the use of sustainable use of timber using the residuals to generate power. There is something important, and to increase the value of the local product, producing, for example, wood products within the Amazon, not to export the timber itself, but the furniture and other products. Non-timber forest product, this is something that I think for those who were on yesterday's session on the bioeconomy possibilities of it, there are so many possibilities of new products. In the same way, fishing. Fishing in the Amazon is extremely important in many reasons, and we are still discovering fishes in the Amazon, and we are destroying these species even before we know about that. But we definitely need to do a different way of policy making. It's not the Amazon needs subsidies. First of all, what we need to do is to stop subsidies and incentives to destroy the Amazon and reuse these subsidies, not as a subsidy itself, but as a payment in a way to encourage actions that simultaneously enhance economic activity plus social inclusion and respect to local traditions and cultures and the environment. And this is possible. There are many specific examples in the in our chapter to put on this. Just to give you the famous example that we have on the sustainable fishing of Pirarucu, that it's possible using the combination of science on the management of fish stocks with local knowledge on how to manage and how to fish this resource, adding value and the label of origin. And nowadays I can buy in Rio de Janeiro Pirarucu that has sustainably extracted from the Amazon without any disturbance because it's not an exotic species. We need to have carbon as an economic policy. The dimension of the problems that my previous colleagues presented represent in economic terms billions or maybe trillions of dollars in terms of damage. It is much more economic to avoid this problem. But for that, we need to have proper policies, not only pilot projects, not only propaganda for ESG. What we need is real action policies on how to implement carbon plus sustainable development projects that at the same time protect the forest, but protect ecosystem services and the quality of life and the economic possibilities for these communities. And of course, what we need qualification, we need skills, we need better education. And to have better education, we need digital access, we need better information, better equipment. So we are talking about many possibilities, including for the public services. We need to reshape public administrations to think in another way. It's a huge task, and I stop for now, otherwise I know my time will be over. But the challenges are huge, but on the other hand, the payoff is also extremely big. So as my friend Virgilio Viana likes to say, the Amazon is too big for us to let us make a mistake about it. We need to make it right. We need to make it correctly for our own survival. So just now for the last slide, please. The references for my presentation is they're all in our website, the Amazon We Want. So it's chapter 30 of the report. And we are also doing policy briefs that make, these very thick and heavy documents more digestible for people to read. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Cadu. Very incredible presentation. And it was good to hear you at the end, because we are looking for some kind of perspective to go out of this situation. So thank you very much. I will come back with the questions. And so just a reminder for people who are with us. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please send them on the Q&A button on Zoom, and I will try to reach them. But in the meanwhile, we have some other stuff here. And I'm sorry, I have read the summarize CV of these incredible scientists. Otherwise, we are going to listen to their CV without listening to them. But I'll start with Carlos Nobre, if he's I don't know if he's here. Otherwise, Carlos, yeah. So thank you. There is a question for you, and if you can, the new Brazilian government pledged zero deforestation by 2030. What are the main challenges for these, and how could they be overcome? I know it's a complicated question, but what do you think, if you have to start now for the first year, what would you do? What would you do?
Well, of course, if we compare 2023 with 2003 and 2004, there was an explosion of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. And then starting 2004-05, Brazilian government implemented under Environment Minister Marina Silva, very effective policy, reduction of 83% deforestation, 2004, 2012. So basically, we know how to do it in Brazil, but all over the Amazon, because most of the deforestation, degradation is illegal, is related to the organized crime. The big challenge now, more than in 2003, 2004, is the enhancement, the growth of the organized crime all over the Amazon, all Amazonian countries, including connected to drug trafficking, illegal logging, illegal mining. Everything is illegal. 95% of all new deforestation the last 4 years under the former president of Brazil was illegal. So it's a big challenge, because the government now has to fight. It's a war, as we are seeing in the Yanomami territory, to fight the illegality, the crime. So therefore, it's a big war. Let's hope Amazonian countries, particularly Brazil, will win this war. Unlike drug trafficking, the satellite systems monitor every day what's going on. Illegal airstrip in a illegal gold mining, you see the airstrip, you see any beginning of any illegality, forest deforestation, forest degradation. You see today even the selected logging, you can immediately spot whether there was a permit, if this is illegal. So anyway, so information is there, but you have to switch and send tens of thousands of law enforcement and fight the organized crime. I think this is the big challenge, and 2023 is the year of the challenge. Brazil and other Amazonian countries, but particularly Brazil and also Colombia with the new president Petro, they have to win the battle against crime. So they want to reduce dramatically deforestation to 2023, hopefully more than 50%. And then in the next several years to be really getting to zero deforestation. So I think, and keep in mind that President Lula and also President Petro said something very important: zero deforestation. They did not say illegal deforestation. They said deforestation. So this is new. This is very important, because we have 2 million square kilometers in the Amazon, the forest degraded. We have plenty of areas for forestry restoration, agroecological, agroforestry systems. A new economy, CADU, showed very well the potential. So I would say this is a much tougher challenge for President Lula now in 2023 compared to 2003, 2004. But we have to hope that Brazilians all will support that, all Amazonian countries, we are going to win this battle.
Thank you, Carlos. Yeah, a huge and difficult task, as you all said, but yeah. Well, we are starting to see some action in Roraima, and some very strong action, let's see, in this first, I don't know, 40-something days from government Lula. He just started, and we are seeing a lot. Well, let me ask you Luciana, Dr. Luciana Gatti, there was a specific question for you by somebody called Yugan. I don't know if you want to add anything or if you want another question.
I answer. This is a very promising measurements for we understand better what's happening with the forest COS. For the trees, they observe COS as CO2.
Sorry, if you can remember, because not everybody knows the question. So.
Okay. Jürgen Kesselmeyer asked me when we measure, where, what time of the day. We measure in the vertical profiles. We sample 2 times per month in 4 places in the noontime, because is the condition more constant between the days. And this is an effort for we have a tracer about the carbon sink from the forest. And this is we are very happy in having more these tools to understand better what's happening with the forest, how much is changing. This increasing carbon emission represents less sink or more human emissions. This is a very important questions. And then,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask you something else, because it's connected with your presentation and your recent studies. So somebody asked, what important data regarding the tipping point have you studied in the past year that is of most concern?
In the southeast part, because the unique tracer we have until now is how much CO2 comes from fire. We have the total carbon flux, we subtract the fire, then we have the net biome exchange that is everything, not fire. This can mean photosynthesis, respiration, and the natural degradation by the forest, but also degradation promoted by the human activities. Then this is a big pool, and we are observing the southeast part, this net biome exchange. This can mean all emissions and absorbance, not fire, is increasing over the time. This scares us a lot, because this can mean the forest there are now a source, or the sink is very small and the source, not fire, from human emissions is very strong and each time is strongest. And these COS measurements will help us to separate. But this is what worries more, because this is the unique part of the Amazon where the net biome exchange emissions are positive. This can mean emit more than absorb. All other regions have sink. This can mean removing the human emissions. We observe still a sink absorption. Then this is the worst part. And there is where we observe the strongest climate change with increasing temperature. And including September, in the last 40 years, just September, the increase in these months was 3.2 degrees in the last 40 years. This is unbelievable. Imagine the maximum temperature, maybe 7 degrees, the increase in maximum temperature for this region. Of course, this will cause a collapse in the forest, and this is what we are afraid. And this is what's showed to us that we are very near a tipping point. Then it's an emergency, I'll do something there, you know.
Thank you. Thank you. Very scary. Your words are very scary. And the need of urgency is really present in all presentations that we've heard. So, yeah. Dr. Paulette, I hope you are still with us. And there is a question for you. What actions, as you mentioned, that the issues are transboundary. this, what we are talking. So the question is, what actions do you believe are necessary to curb degradation across the basin, considering that the issues are transboundary?
Yes, I'm still here, and thank you, thank you for the question. I know that, you know, for example, we have the Amazonia Treaty of Cooperation as Secretariat, and through that, one of the areas of cooperation obviously would relate to environmental protection and sustainable development. First, I think that we need to be able to share data. We need to share data on different matters related to the drivers and pressures that result, well, are related to environmental degradation, not only forest degradation, but climate change and other matters. Then we can also have, I think, maybe regional programs at university. I'm in a university setting, and we can have, for example, one of my colleagues talked about a program he's teaching on sustainability. That can very well be a program that can be taught throughout the Amazon in different languages, so that we are building a cadre of young people who are able to really have the critical thinking and the problem solving skills, and who understand the importance of metrics before decisions. Because I think a lot of times policies are made and they're not driven by data, they're not driven by the science. And if we can really have a program that would allow us to have the, you know, to have certain standards, certain benchmarks across the region, so that when we talk about environmental science, for example, being taught at a university in the Amazon, we should be teaching the same things, because otherwise I think it would be difficult for us to really train decision makers who probably will have political offices tomorrow. So this is another important aspect. Another thing is that we can do regional monitoring, because our countries are not on the same level when it comes to technological advancement. So if we talk about the use of GIS, if we talk about remote sensing, if we talk about drones and all of that, maybe, for example, in French Guyana and maybe even in Brazil, you know, they're far advanced in these areas. How can we lend? How can governments lend support to help us to monitor, to help the countries to monitor the resources? And we can also have lessons learned, because some countries would have some very unique experiences that you can draw some lessons so that we don't repeat it. For example, and this is the lessons don't always have to be bad. You can have good lessons, right? So if we look at Guyana as an example, Guyana was the very first country in the world that embarked on a national scale low carbon development strategy, in which the government of Guyana in 2009-2010 signed that MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with the government of Norway. And so for standing forests, we paid $250 million US. Now, fast forward in 2020, when the government changed, the present government decided that, look, we are going to work on another phase of the low carbon development strategy. So we now have low carbon development strategy 2030. And key to that is renewable energy and also sustainable forestry management. And in this particular low carbon development strategy, monies that proceeds from the carbon trading through the forest, an allocation is set aside for the indigenous communities, right? We have about 12% of the population comprising indigenous people, most of whom live in the forest areas. And only this morning at this international conference I'm attending on oil and gas, the president of Guyana, Dr. Irfan Ali, announced that on Wednesday, checks will be given to the Tushals, the village captains, of all areas of indigenous people, all the indigenous villages. So I'm saying that this is a lesson that can be shared with other Amazonian countries that are forested. So sharing of information, sharing of lessons, sharing of data, we can, and sharing of some training from university, but also, and I think very importantly, and this is because I am the Deputy Dean of the Graduate School at the University of Guyana, I think that we can have interregional research. We have issues of related to indiscriminate mining. We're talking about mercury-free mining. You know, why can't we have more of that sort of, you know, interregional research so that we can pool our human capital and to find some very workable solutions? So those are the ones that come to mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Paulette. It was very interesting because I was studying just this morning that the United Nations is pushing for the countries to put climate change in for the children, for kids to study at schools and in 2025. So it was really interesting that you mentioned education at the university. And they are trying to see that, like in the African countries, like a kind of resilient way of leading to climate change. So thank you very much. Well, we are running out of time here, but there is something for Professor Marengo, which is, I would like to ask you about adaptation, because, you know, I like this thing and you also, but there is a question for you. How does climate change affect conservation and social inclusion in the Amazon? Wow.
Social inclusion in the Amazon. Well, there are several aspects in terms of consequences to the population, you see. And we are not talking about the population of Manaus or Belém, we are talking about the indigenous population. And from experiences we have here at Semadengo, and we got the visit of several religious leaders from different religions, including indigenous from the Andes and from the Amazon. The perception of climate change, perception of global warming and extremes is quite high. People, they know already that the climate is changing. They don't need to talk about models or the uncertainties of the modeling, but I think there is a perception on that. And I think the idea of perhaps to create this inclusion is through the perception. I think our colleague from Guyana mentioned that in terms of education. So that's the only way. When you start putting in their minds that the climate is changing, not about models or about satellite data, no, just the main issue that people is changing. The extremes are becoming very extremes, are more extremes that they are affecting population, they are affecting their way of life, they have to migrate to other places. We talk about the Andean people, for instance, they are moving higher and higher to grow potato because where they grow now is becoming a bit warmer. So I think there are several ways, but one way is the education. I think that the only way to favor inclusion is the perception that the problem exists and is doing something already to the people, or something has to be done, either for the population or also from the governments in terms of international climate agreements or things like that. But I think that create the perception is something that needs to be done. And perhaps we need to work on that, not us as a scientist, perhaps we have the need of social communicators to bring the message to the indigenous people and people living in there, small farmers or fishermen, for instance.
Thank you. Thank you to your observation, Professor Marengo. Really, really, really important to bring the indigenous people and the indigenous knowledge more on this discussion. Thank you. So we are really running out of time, but there is a question for Professor Carlos Young. I loved your things about the languages and how sad it is to lose people and languages. And I remember that somebody told me that in Brazil we talk more languages, 300 languages, than in the entire UN system. So it's incredible. And well, there is a question, a specific question for you, is related to bioeconomy and how you more or less, you talked about that in your presentation, but if you can go a little bit further, how can government specifically support a strong, inspiring, and bioeconomy?
Okay, unless I have much more time, I have to make a very brief answer to this very challenging question. But I mean, first of all, bioeconomy is not what we do, it's how we do it. Therefore, how public policy can help on that. First of all, stop the wrong incentives to the predatory use, which is not only bad for the environment, is also socially bad. And it's bad to the economy. And many examples from the economic cycles of the Amazon that after a boom period, they boost and just get into stagnation, either mining or logging or even unsustainable ranching and cultivation. So first of all, we need to have a different approach on that. We do not need to colonize. I always recall something from Salman Rushdie on how India was discovered. It was never covered. We do not need to discover the Amazon. What we need, we stop to cover it and let the Amazonian solutions happen. Of course, integrating with the 21st century. So what we need is education. We need health, sustainable infrastructure, energy, sustainable energy. We need to have the background, plus we need to have the action of the government, in the demand side of it. We need an active role of the state for sustainable development. A green economy does not happen spontaneously. For example, procurement policies. The government in the Amazon has a strong power, is the biggest employer, is the biggest buyer. So if you improve the way the governments, local and national governments buy stuff, it is important. Just stop buying products that are coming not only from deforestation, but also that has slavery involved, no respect to traditional communities, no respect to children. And finally, we need to have an Amazonian perspective in an overall way, not only at the national level. Just to give an example, for the present moment, something very important is happening in Brazil. We are expelling the illegal garimpeiros, the illegal miners from the Yanomami territory. The problem is that they might end up in Guyana or Venezuela or Suriname, that is already suffering a lot with the invasion of it. We need an integrated approach to have coordination between public policies. And of course, specific incentives for sustainable investment. I just make a small add now. We had just finished a guide for sustainable investment in Amapá State. I will let all colleagues from SPA to know when we'll be launching it. And we have an active role of the local state government on that. And also we hope from the federal government, because we need to provide correct incentives to the correct activities. Everything can be done, but we need planning and we need transparency. And of course, we need democracy.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Carlos. I'm also interested in this new study in the Amapá region. So let's go for the closing remarks of Professor Carlos Nobre, that he has to leave in some minutes. So Professor Carlos Nobre, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you very much, Luciana, Paulette, Marengo, and Kadu. And we could see, 3 out of the 4 presentations, they were showing how close to a tipping point we are in the whole Amazon, deforestation, degradation, wildfires. All these risks are very, really, it's the day before. We have to stop that. And of course, for this, in addition to implementing effective policies, law enforcement policies, but we need to find this new economy this new bioeconomy. And we have also to develop this new bioeconomy of standing forests. We have really another challenge, which is a very cultural challenge, not easy to overcome, but I think we have to do it. Well, when the Europeans came 500 years ago to all of the Americans, they completely ignored the life of all indigenous people all over the Americas, North America, Central America, South America. And what they did, they brought cattle. So cattle is 65% of the drivers of all deforestation in the tropics. In the Amazon, lowland in the Amazon, 90% of the first deforestation is for a pasture, for a cattle range. And cattle is 8% of GDP in the US, it's 7% of GDP in Brazil. What's the economic potential? The current products of all of Brazilian biodiversity, including the Amazon, manioc, açaí, cocoa, Brazil nuts, etc., is 0.2% of our GDP. So really, come on, let's change it. Let's really export our biodiversity to the rest of the world. Let's make people use many more products for their well-being, for their health, than only beef or meat. So I think this is a cultural challenge that we have to change across the world. It's not only across the world, it's all over the world, particularly in Brazil. Brazil is the 5th largest consumer, per capita consumer of meat. US is the 3rd one, Argentina is the 1st one, Uruguay is the 2nd one. So we have really to change even our eating habits. We have to start exploiting the potential of biodiversity. It's much better for our health, not only for food, but many, many products. Therefore, let's make that challenge, and Science Panel for the Amazon will take that challenge. Let's invade the rest of the world. Let's make our diversity of people, indigenous people, and these thousands of products from the Amazon, let's make those things invade the rest of the world. This is our big challenge and the challenge of the Science Panel for the Amazon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, 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 very much. Very inspiring. Thank you for your words. And thank you for everybody. Professor Luciana Gatti, Professor José Marengo, pleasure to see you. Professor Paulette and Cadu, Professor Carlos, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to mediate this panel, which was really, really easy, an easy task for me. A very pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you all.
everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.